Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar session on the disappearing women and girls in Pakistan, abducted, forcibly converted, forcibly married and abused. My name is Evelina Ohab and I will moderate this session. I'm joined by a distinguished panel of experts that I will introduce shortly. Over the recent years, we have seen data on the issue of disappearing women and girls in Pakistan, including from the Movement for Solidarity and Peace, a human rights organization which assessed that approximately 1,000 Christian and Hindu women and girls are abducted each year, forced to convert and marry Muslim men in Pakistan. The victims are usually between the ages of 12 and 25. Despite those shocking statistics, the number of victims may be even higher as many cases remain unreported, often due to the girls' families' limited financial means or the associated stigma. As the issue continues to be neglected, we decided to gather a few experts to discuss the issue and the needed response. Lord Alton will also announce a new initiative to trigger more engagement on the topic. Today, you will hear from Lord Alton of Liverpool, peer at the UK House of Lords and officer of the APPG on Pakistani minorities, among many other hats. You'll hear from Professor Maris Tadros, Director of the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development, CREED, Institute of Development Studies, University of Sussex. You will also hear from Ambreen Qureshi, barrister and chairperson of the Lahore High Court Bar Association's Human Rights and Women Empowerment Committee. And you will hear also from Anton De Piro, Chief of Staff at Stan Hill Foundation and Human Rights Advocate. And now, without any further ado, I will give the floor to Lord Alton of Liverpool, here at the UK House of Lords. Lord Alton, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Evelina. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for bringing us together on this webinar. As co-chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Pakistan Minorities, I was able to travel to Pakistan, and it was during that visit that I met Ambreen Qureshi, and I'm especially pleased to be sharing a platform with her today. Not only do I have a huge regard for Ambreen as one of Pakistan's most notable lawyers, courageous, diligent, persistent and consistent in every respect, but also some of her colleagues whom I was able to meet in Lahore at the Lahore Bar Association, especially some of the younger members called to the bar who want to uphold the highest of legal standards. And in the same visit, I was able to meet members of the High Court, including the Chief Justice. And I have nothing but admiration for the people I met at that very high level. So I wouldn't want anything that is said today to be interpreted as a criticism of the highest reaches of Pakistan's court and judicial system, because I have nothing but admiration for it. But at lower levels, things are done, which unfortunately reflect badly both on Pakistan, but on us all. And in shining a light, as we're doing today in this webinar, on the position of disappearing women, looking at abductions, talking about forced marriages and forced conversions, I know that there are many people who share our concerns about these things in Pakistan as well. And it's wonderful that Ambreen is able to join us. But I'm also glad that Professor Maris Tadros, the director of CREED, is here, because her campaign for justice for Samina Kinza Iqbal, who's a 16-year-old girl who was abducted by men twice her age, is deeply moving. And when we hear from Professor Tadros and about her work at CREED, I think it will be an incentive to all of us to engage more seriously in this issue, on which so little attention has been focused, and yet it is one of the terrible tragedies of our time. During that visit to Pakistan, we took evidence from civil society groups, from NGOs, and from individuals, and I was deeply shocked to hear some of the stories of young girls and women who had been abducted. We heard stories, incidentally, also of trafficking of women across the borders of Pakistan, not least into provinces of China, where, because of the one-child policy there over the years, it's meant that there is a significant imbalance between the male and female populations of China. And so that has led to trafficking and abductions. And it's people from minorities, girls from minorities, from Hindu and Christian, other minority backgrounds, who are most likely to be abducted and sold into this form of slavery, which, what other word can one use in these circumstances? Now, the case of Sunia Kinza Iqbal is by no means unique. According to the Movement for Solidarity and Peace, MSP, which is a human rights organization in Pakistan, around 1,000 Christian and Hindu women and girls, usually between the ages of 12 and 25, are kidnapped each and every single year, and they're forced to convert. Among the disappearing women and girls, I want to give just 3 cases because they link to that of Kinza Iqbal. There's Huma Yunus, who was abducted from her parents' home in Karachi on the 10th of October 2019. Born on the 22nd of May 2005, Huma was just 14 years old. I repeat, 14 years old at the time of the alleged abduction. I served for a number of years on the board of Aid to the Church in Need, and in their report, they say this, and I quote, "Judges in the case ruled that as per Sharia law, even if Huma was a minor, the marriage between her and her alleged abductor would be valid as she had already had her first menstrual cycle." Now, despite attempts to get her back, she's still with her perpetrators and she is now pregnant. Among the disappearing women and girls, there is Maya Shehbaz. She's another 14-year-old Christian girl who at the end of April 2020 was reportedly abducted and forced to marry in Faisalabad. That's in the Punjab. Her parents tried to get her back, but unsuccessfully. The Lahore High Court has recently overturned the verdict of a sessions court in Faisalabad, which had directed that Myra be rehabilitated in a women's shelter, and they ordered that the 14-year-old girl should be returned to her abductor. From what we know, Myra has since escaped her abductor. However, this doesn't mean that she will then be able to lead a normal life. There are still horrendous challenges that she will face, not least things like rejection and stigma. Among the disappearing women and girls, there is Kumi Muskan, and Anton De Piro, who's on this panel as well today, has been deeply involved in trying to find solutions in Puma's case, and I salute him for all the work that he's done for Puma. She's another teenage girl, forcibly converted and forcibly married. In this case, after a lengthy legal battle, the Lahore High Court decided that Puma's conversion was not valid and ordered her to return home. The court said, and I quote, "Puma Muskan is barely 14 years old, and she is not sui juris. She lacks legal capacity to change religion on her own. However," they said, "the question of faith being a matter of heart and one's conviction, no court can declare her conversion invalid or void. It can only refuse to recognize or give effect to it for certain legal purposes. The petitioner, being the lawful guardian of Pumi Muskan, is entitled to her custody." The petitioner. There is no reason to deprive her of that right. However, despite this success, Pumi was not able to return to normal life. Her conversion to Islam was being seen by many as valid, and her return home and return to Christianity seen as apostasy. And as such, of course, Pumi faces threats, and not least some call for the execution, for the death of people who apostatize. Ultimately, she had to flee Pakistan as she wasn't safe there. Now, these are just 3 stories. 3 stories of teenage girls, but they're 3 stories out of thousands who have been abducted, forcibly converted, and forcibly married in Pakistan in recent years. Because this issue continues to be neglected, the all-party parliamentary group on Pakistan minorities, as Evelina told you at the outset, but in cooperation with other all-party parliamentary groups in both houses of parliament, and along with experts, will be producing a report on the disappearing women and girls in Pakistan. We want to add the names and the faces to the statistics that we often hear. We want to shed light on their stories and show how the law, the legal system, and the society have abandoned them, leaving them without any other option but to accept the fate that was imposed upon them by their abductors. It's not the girls and the women who should be disappearing, but wholly unacceptable laws and practices which should be disappearing. They shouldn't exist in the 21st century, and I hope that this webinar will play some small part in eliminating them once and for all.
Thank you very much, Lord Alton, for reminding us the fates of the three girls and reminding us as well that those three stories are out of thousands of disappearing women and girls in Pakistan. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Maris Tadros, Director of the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development. Maris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evelina, for organizing this. And thank you, Lord Alton, for taking this forward and putting it as an issue of priority, because we have made some progress globally in recognizing gender-based violence. But this has often been in particular forms. We've made some progress on recognizing female genital mutilation as a form of gender-based violence. We've made some progress in recognizing violence in conflict situations, for example, by ISIS or by other perpetrators, such as in the Bosnia-Herzegovina war. But when it comes to everyday practices, when it comes to matters that pertain to a certain kind of targeting based on your affiliation or association with a religious minority in a context where there is a campaign to homogenize a society, I'm afraid we have let women and girls down and their communities and ourselves as well, because this is an issue about our humanity and about, as Lord Alton says, who do we recognize and who do we oversee, who do we neglect, and when we talk about gender-based violence and when we talk about abuse. And the challenge is that often when we talk about religious minority women, people don't feel very comfortable about the term. But here we're not talking about a particular group. Although today we are talking about Pakistan as a case study, we know this is a global phenomenon. We know just across the border in India, right-wing Hindutva supporters are actively propagating the idea that Muslim women should be lured into marriages and converted into Hinduism. And this has been made very public. And in other places as well, we see phenomena of the targeting of women who belong to religious minorities. So it is unfortunately a global phenomenon, but also very regrettably that when it comes to recognizing them for what they are, they're being targeted because they belong to religious minorities and because they are poor and because they're geographically desegregated, all intersecting together. This has not been given the due attention like other groups that we have seen being recognized. So I'm so glad that we are starting today with Pakistan, although I look forward to other countries that we will also share from the work we have been doing in CREED. Let me give you very briefly what CREED is. The Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development is a consortium led by IDS, but it's a consortium which involves working with, in leadership with, El Khoi Foundation, Minority Rights Group, and REFSEMI. REFSEMI is led by Archbishop Engelos, and Deputy Director is Evelina Ohab. With El Khoi and Minority Rights Group and REFSEMI are a very large number of local partners, many of whom we're not always in a position to share their identities because of the very fragile and secure context in which they work, but in other cases they have been able to come and present to the UK, and we hope we'll have many more opportunities. The Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development aims to integrate freedom of religion or belief in sustainable development. And development meaning the broader meaning of the word, anything that seeks to enhance freedoms and elicit positive change. And one stream of work has been on the intersection of gender, socioeconomic exclusion, and religious marginality. And to that effect, we convened a group of practitioners, development practitioners and activists and local leaders from Pakistan, Iraq, Egypt, Myanmar, Nigeria. And one of the first cases that has been completed is from Pakistan. And what the leaders did there was a Christian working in Christian communities, a Hindu practitioner with Hindu women, an Ahmadiyya working with the Ahmadi community, and also a Shia working with the marginalized Shia. And the reason why we did it this way is that we wanted to collect data from the ground, both qualitative and quantitative, using participatory quantitative data methods in order to understand the daily experiences of poor women who belong to these communities And the idea that this would be collected by someone from within the community was so important for us, because that minimizes the risk, the security issues, but also the legitimacy and people being able to open up. And what we have found that across the board, especially for Christian and Hindu women, is that the fear of abduction was a real one. And it was something that was repeatedly mentioned in the reports. We will have the reports ready within a month. We will be able to share them with everyone. But the point is, this is something that is not just a one-off case. This is something that, as Lord Alton, we're talking here about 1,000 cases being recorded officially, but for every official case, there are many more unofficial cases, and terrorized to even report it, because their houses can be burnt down, they can be, other girls can be kidnapped. In the report on the Hindu women, Seema, who's the author of the report, says that many women said that they wouldn't even, they know of cases that have been abducted, but they didn't go report to the police because the families of the abductors went to them, said, and if you go to the police to report this, one more or two more of your daughters will be abducted. So it is a case of, as Lord Alton and Evelina mentioned, a case of suffering in silence, and the invisible sources of intimidation are very real. And as you said, Lord Alton, this month, it's just over a month now that we started our campaign on behalf of Saniha, and Minority Rights Group has been, through its local partners, providing legal advice to the family of Saniha through a lawyer. But the case is one where, like many other cases, the abductor is known. This is not a case like ISIS, where ISIS conquers a village and takes over women into, and then sells them into sexual markets, or puts them to sexual slavery, and we don't know the perpetrators. In many of these cases, the abductors are known. And this was the case in Saniha's case. She was abducted by the security guard of the hospital where she was visiting her mother. And when the abductor and two others with him kidnapped her on her way to church on the day in which she was kidnapped, people in the community told her who the abductor was. They were able to get in touch with the family of the abductor and say, please release our daughter, but obviously to no avail to this day. So I just want to be able to get a sense of what we are up against, because what we're up against, and I think this is where we really need to not just break the silence, but challenge ourselves a little bit, is often the community, and sometimes even, unfortunately, I hate to say this, feminists say, but she may have left out of her own choice. Because the abductor is known to the family, people assume that, well, what if she fell in love and she went out of her own choice? What if his intent was an honorable one, given that he married her? So this idea of playing with this idea of intent and choice is a major hurdle that we must overcome, so that people can see this with the same gravity as they see the abduction of ISIS, of Yazidi and Christian women, and people don't have a problem in recognizing this as acts against humanity. But when it comes to these cases of everyday abductions, they always question both intent. Well, surely his intent was honorable given that he married her, and choice. Maybe she fell in love. And to be able to really get a sense of, the fact that we must overcome this hurdle, I want to make a comparison to here in the United Kingdom in cases of sexual grooming. Now, when young women were taken by sexual predators, and some of them were 14, 15, some of them were 16, and these sexual predators often didn't just abduct them like ISIS, but they often started by befriending these young women, showering them with gifts, telling them they love them, that they want to make them their girlfriend, etc., etc., in the initial stages of grooming, before then moving on to raping them, to using all kinds of sexual abuse to basically force them into a case of psychological slavery. When these men were caught, and I'm just saying sexual predation happens by men of all religions, of all backgrounds. But if we look at this case in the United Kingdom, when these women were freed and they were being given the chance to give their testimonies, nobody said, "Oh, but you accepted his gifts. You went of your own accord. You allowed yourself to be ensnared in this person's plan." Nobody said this. People recognized that this was, even if initially the victim, the survivor, was known to the predator, it doesn't make it. People recognize that this issue of intent, that this was an intent of not just being her good boyfriend, this was an intent of sexual predation. And people recognize that it's not okay to blame the girl or the young woman and say she went of her own choice. People recognize that there was a case of psychological slavery that is involved when you have cases of sexual grooming. So I just want us, I want us to implore everyone who cares about women's rights, who cares about children's rights, who cares about the idea of our common humanity, who cares about the idea of justice, that it's not just about did you know the person or not, to recognize that these are cases in Pakistan and in India and in other cases where it is ideologically or motivated sexual grooming, or cases of ideologically motivated abductions, which end up in cases of sexual slavery and end up in cases of forced marriage and then forced conversion. And the reason why I'm saying that is because often courts say, "Oh, but we have the evidence that she converted. Oh, but we'll bring her in court." But that's not how it works. What kind of conditions are you ensuring that she converted in? When you bring her into with court, who is she being accompanied by? Are you creating an enabling environment for the judge, for the people, for the young woman to be able to give their testimony free from intimidation and fear that their houses will be burned down, that the entire family will be subjected to violence? So like in the UK, we recognized that issues of intent and choice are not just established by what goes on paper, but we need to look into what are the circumstances. We also need the same thing. Because in the case of Saniha, they said, "Oh, we have the evidence, we have the paperwork that she converted." But who was the person that established her conversion? Because even in Islam, it says there is no compulsion in religion. And there is a very clear Quranic injunction, la ikraha fi din, there is no compulsion in religion, is a case where you need to show that the person was not under compulsion. So the complexity of this is that this is something that is happening on an everyday basis. So people risk overlooking it because it's not like a case of sexual violence in war and conflict setting, but this is an everyday setting. And the complexity of this is people are being subjected to this in silence, and it's almost like the person, the survivor, is being asked to show that their innocence, as opposed to that the sexual predator is being recognized for what he is, that he is engaging in sexual predation, and that he's doing this in many cases in the name of religion, or when he's not doing it in the name of religion, he knows that the law and the system and the police force will be able to back him up. And I think how do we break this vicious circle is very important. And just very quickly, I think the most important measure we must take to break this vicious circle is first and foremost for the police to act immediately and quickly. Because we know, Lord Alton, in the case of sexual trafficking of girls, the key point, whether it's in Pakistan or in the UK or in Mozambique or Mongolia, wherever we are, the key issue is to act quickly, is to, when the family report a missing young woman, or missing young women, the police must take the claim and act quickly. And in all the cases of abductions and disappearances, the police simply don't act. They say, well, maybe she went of her own accord. We don't have the evidence to know that she has been abducted, and they don't act. So the fact the police are obligated, whether the girl is underage or whether she is over the age of 16, to take the report seriously, to look for the young woman and to immediately return her is the first and most important step to breaking this vicious circle of emboldening sexual predators to target women. And the second is the issue of conversion. The fact that in Pakistan, there are hundreds of thousands of Islamic authorities that give themselves the right to issue a declaration that this Hindu woman or this Christian woman has been converted. This right should be withdrawn from them. We should have a system where if someone, first of all, your underage children should not have the right to convert. And secondly, where conversion happens, we need to have the evidence and the independent parties to establish whether this conversion was real or not. In 2016 and 2019, in the Sindh province of Pakistan, there was, and Sindh is very important because this is where the majority of economically marginalized, socially excluded Christian and Hindu minor girls are abducted. Twice there was an attempt to issue a law to prevent the conversion of minors. And the second time round in 2019, the Jamaat Islamiyya, the Islamic radical group, told basically threatened the governor of Sindh province not to go ahead with the law. Now, some people would say, but then you are driving an underage girl from being able to embrace a religion if she wants to. But the same has never been said about female genital mutilation. Nobody ever objected around the world of having a law to protect children from being mutilated. And the same should apply here. Nobody should defend a law which is often, in its absence, we know that people are being emboldened to force young women into conversions and forced marriages. And I just want to talk, because I know I know that this is a very complex issue, but I just want to end on one final point on this, because the vicious circle isn't just about the perpetrator being emboldened and many more thousands of women suffering, even though this is the most important dimension. It is about whole communities being torn apart. And it is about other women and their freedoms being put in jeopardy. From the interviews that Naumana, who is leading, who has led the work, who has done the empirical work among Christians in Pakistan, and Seema, who has done the same with Hindus, many of these poor families, Christians and Muslims, said that when a girl disappears, often the reaction is that families say, oh, we better not let the women go out to work. We better not let the girls go to school. And what it does is it increasingly circumscribes the spaces, the rights of other women just to be able to, go to school, just to be able to earn a living for themselves. And it creates this sense of putting more and more restrictions on other women. That is the kind of vicious circle that I'm talking about. It is not, it is one that the ripple effects are felt across the entire community. And I think what breaks my heart and many others is that we have a vibrant, amazing, wonderful feminist movement in Pakistan that has brought about massive change. It would be so wonderful if the feminist movement is out there protesting for every single Christian and Hindu woman that disappears. That this is not just a question of minorities, this is a question of affecting all the Pakistani women. It's about all Pakistani society. And ultimately, it's about all our humanity, whether we are based in Pakistan, or whether we are based in the UK. I'll stop there, but thank you so much for giving us the space to share this.
Thank you very much, Maris, and of course we look forward to seeing your paper and reading more about your research in Pakistan, but also, as you mentioned, you've been conducting similar research in other countries, so this is something that we'll definitely be very interested to see. And now I would like to give the floor to Ambreen Qureshi, barrister and chairperson of the Lahore High Court Bar Association's Human Rights and Women Empowerment Committee. Ambreen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be part of this session with such distinguished speakers. I'll start by a phrase from Quran, which is "La ikraha fi din." There is no compulsion in religion. And I read a saying of our Prophet, which is, "Beware if anyone wrongs a non-Muslim, I shall be his adversary on the day of judgment." I read the pact of Hazrat Umar in Jerusalem, where if we see the Muslim history, where he says that I assure you safety of yourself, safety of your property, safety of your churches, and safety of your crosses. There will be no forcibly converted. So if I see the Islamic history and if I see the word forcibly converted, nobody should be forcibly converted. I see it right there in Hazrat Umar's Khatab, in the pact. I see my Prime Minister Imran Khan on 29th of July 2009 saying forced conversions are un-Islamic. I see a parliamentary committee being made on the 21st of November 2019 to ensure that rights are given to the minorities. But I also see that only 3 days ago, 171 Hindus who are below the poverty line have converted to Islam. I also see that even very recently, some of the cases you may not have heard of because they have not gotten the international coverage is on the 18th of June 2020, 16-year-old Reshma Kaur was arrested from Sindh. You have Kainat Megwan, who's an 18-year-old, another Hindu girl who's married to a 57-year-old Muhammad Ashfaq. You have 10-year-old girl whose pictures and videos I've already seen myself, whose body was found in the sugarcane field of Rahim Yar Khan after being raped and murdered. It's a 10-year-old girl, Christian girl. And then on the 10th, as early as 10th of September, this 14-year-old girl, Parvisha Khumari from Ori, Sindh, was abducted and converted to Islam, married to her abductor. This is what I see on the other hand. Now, I am very well aware, and I'm sure all of you are, that Pakistan was built on the fact, was made on the fact that there should be religious freedom. The white of a flag also indicates that minorities should have the right. Quaid-e-Azam, the Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of the nation, said, you're free to go to your temples, you're free to go to your churches. Our constitution endorses that. But this is not the case when a victim is abducted. The first thing that I like to highlight, being somebody who is very much involved at the grassroots level, and is once a victim is abducted, the first thing is to go to the police station. Now, keeping in mind that these people that we're talking about are part of this massive economic inequality. In other words, you could actually say that most of them that we are right now talking about are the modern version of slaves, the South Asian slavery, if I should call them, because they're part of the bonded labor, most of them, majority of them. And what are they up against? They are up against the Muslim landlords, the Muslim farmers, and this is what they have to go before the police station with no power, no influence, and also not the same religion. So if a man whose daughter has been abducted, or if somebody from her family, the first thing is, what has happened is the first question. So when you're going to give your name, another thing that I'll also like to highlight is if you see you will never see an Angela, you will never see a Christian girl. The names, since the time that they're born, they're living with that fear that they're going to be abducted, they're going to be converted. And that is why you'll see Sidra, you will see Kainat, you will see, Alina, names like that to cover them up and cover their religion. So the first thing is when you go to the police station and when you are asking for an FIR to be lodged, the moment the name comes or the moment the religion comes, this is what is going to stop the police officer. Oh, what has happened? This is a conversion case. Conversion case to what? Conversion case to Islam. I am a Muslim sitting here. The police officer is going to say that. He'll either not lodge the FIR or there will be false information present there or misleading information present there. So that is the first hurdle. Second is go to the magistrate court. Now, magistrate court, whoever takes, or the session courts, wherever this case is taken up, there will be 4 people or 5 people belonging to the victim as compared to this, whoever this man is who's abducted it, obviously more influential, more powerful, also a Muslim. Ironically, I have to say a Muslim every time, I'm going to refer to this, the accused in such cases, is the fact that there will be hundreds of them standing with him. This intimidation in court is another hurdle. How am I going to stand there, get justice for my daughter, if I know that there are 100 people standing there to support them? That is something that needs to be addressed, and that needs to be also looked into. Now, another thing which Mary's also talked about was the, unchallengeable right of the madrasas to give conversion certificate. I've seen these certificates. It's a mere £1 worth, or you would say 100 rupees worth stamp paper, which they issue saying that somebody has given free will, out of their free will, have converted. So who gives them the right? Now, if we have to go around it, what they teach me, what they teach us in law is there is always a way out. So before we actually, apart from the fact that we need to push this, what we can do is we can also ask for the conversion to be done via courts. There's nothing un-Islamic about that, already happening in Malaysia. So why is it not something that we are not pushing for? We need to push that every conversion has to be done via courts. And that will, I think, significantly impact the number of forced conversion cases that are happening. Supreme Court has given a lot of good decisions for second marriages, not directly in relation to forced conversions, but for any Muslim man who is wanting to remarry now, if he doesn't get permission from the Union Council or from his first wife, he will be fined or will be imprisoned. Now, this is another good judgment that has come, which could be used. I will also like to, in fact, highlight another thing, that the adjournments, if the Wrinkle Kumari case, where she goes to court, she says that I've been forcefully abducted. I did not want to change my religion. And a long adjournment is given by the Supreme Court. And during this long adjournment, she comes back and she says that, oh, I did it out of my own free will. And the decision is made without any inquiry by the Supreme Court, without any investigation, that how come during this time period, this long adjournment that came, she has changed her mind. And that's where we have to highlight the fact that the courts are not working as they should be. These adjournments, these long adjournments in cases like these, forced conversion, rape, all of the child abduction, all of them, the criminal justice system has to ensure that there are no adjournments in these cases. So this is my second point, which is long adjournments in forced conversion cases. You have, as far as the law is concerned, you have section 498B of the Pakistan Penal Code, which could be used. And I think it is so important to give this information out to the minority, so they know that when they go to court, they can use this. They can use something which could be, usable, and where they're not apprehended just because of the fact that they're Muslims, or they're Christians, or it's against the Muslim. 498B reads it says, whoever coerces in any manner whatsoever compels a woman to enter into marriage shall be punished with an imprisonment with 7 years, not less than 3 years. So could be used as a supplementary in FIR lodged in the positions, and I told this to Lord David Alton as well, and which is the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2016. We're all waiting for the Child Restraint Act to come, but my apprehension, and I am pretty sure that it is very evident when I read it, when they're defining a child for the child restraint marriage, they say, provided that in case of a female child, as defined in the Child Marriage Restraint Act 1929, or a non-Muslim woman. I'll be challenging you as long as I can that why have they specially mentioned non-Muslim woman when they are defining a child for the Child Marriage Restraint Act. That is in the future going to cause so much problem for cases of child abductions, cases of forced conversions, and that has to be addressed by the government of Pakistan. And this non-Muslim separate mention of the non-Muslim woman has to be deleted. The other thing is, because we have a parallel Sharia law system, then the wali or the guardian can also legitimize a child marriage, and that needs to be looked into. And for me, the recommendations, like I've said earlier as well, the madrasas should be stopped. They should not issue the conversion certificate. Conversion certificate should be only via the courts, and like it is in Malaysia, it should take a proper procedure with notices, with evidence to show that this has happened. Also, parents' consent should be needed if the child is minor. Without the parents' consent, conversion certificate should not be issued. Okay, parents being their natural guardian till the age of 18, I don't think there's anything that these Islamic groups that you're mentioning should have a problem with. The reform of the police system is absolutely as much mandatory. Also, the criminal justice system, police are taking, so they're taking really long to file the case, or they're always apprehensive to file the FIR to begin with. With the Saneha case as well, I was contacted by John Morris, and then I spoke to the RPO Faisalabad, and only then, once the RPO Faisalabad spoke, he got an investigation, he called the Faisalabad police, and only then the FIR was lodged. So until and unless there is no social media pressure, until and unless there is no influential person involved, these cases are always behind, they lag behind. We need equipments, technology, training, intelligence capacity for the police. They have no idea what they're dealing with. They have no idea how to investigate cases, how to get to the abductor, what to do. And all of this has to be done on an emergency basis. There should be there should be a minority rights emergency declared in Pakistan, so to speak. So I also recommend mandatory women desks to be present in every police station. There should be grassroots awareness campaign happening, because the minorities, these people do not have access to TV, who we're talking about. The elite within the minorities are also not very helpful, sorry to say. I have met them and I have seen that they will not really be wanting to get involved in forced conversion cases. They need to be engaged. They need to be told that this is something that is their responsibility. So that is something that I'll also like to highlight. Secondly, we need influential Muslim leaders who believe in this. And there are many that I know who could speak out and who could tell people, and people at large, such people who believe that this is something that is Islamic, that this is not Islamic. And that would also give us a lot of, it would clear a lot of our hurdles as well. And obviously, lastly, the socioeconomic cultural position of all these minorities, it is absolutely, it's cruel how they live, their living standards, all of them, in all of these cases. You will not see a Parsi in Pakistan who's also part of the minority coming, or even an Ahmadi or a Shia coming and saying that they have been forcefully converted. That's because they're educated, they have monetarily, they're secure. These cases are happening to the Hindus, to the Christians, because of their financial and their socioeconomic position. And that is something that needs to be highlighted. And lastly, Section 292A of the Pakistan Penal Code can be used, which is seducing a child, exposing to seduction. Whoever seduces a child by what is with an intent to involve him in any sexual activity, that could be used by the minorities when they go to file the FIR. The imprisonment is for 7 years plus 100,000 rupees. So these laws which are there could be used as supplementary until or unless government actually take action, and the minorities should be aware of that. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Ambreen, for your presentation. Thank you very much for introducing to us a few more of the disappearing girls, mentioning their names. but who are also not only disappearing girls, but also invisible girls, because we rarely hear their stories. And definitely there's a greater need for more coverage of such stories. Otherwise, we don't know the real scope of the problem. And thank you very much also for listing a number of recommendations that definitely will inform also the work that Lord Alton will be doing with the report on the disappearing girls. And definitely would like to hear more about those recommendations and how they could be implemented. And now, last but not least, I would like to give the floor to Anton DePiro, Chief of Staff at Stanhill Foundation, who has been helping some of the disappearing girls, especially when they were not able to stay in Pakistan and they needed to find a new life somewhere else. Anton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Evelina. It's wonderful to be with all of you today. Over the last 2 years, I've helped Lord Alton with a small number of cases of individuals who have needed to leave Pakistan because of a significant risk to their lives. These were cases of women and girls who were either forcibly accused of a crime, such as blasphemy, or were the disappearing women and girls, namely abducted, forcibly converted, forcibly married and abused. In these cases, through the dedication of their families, communities, human rights advocates and charities, it came to a point where, at least in theory, they were free to return home. In reality, however, these individuals, and this is reflective of the broader situation, and as you well know, they cannot return home, as their lives remain at risk at the hand of a mob or individual radicals who have no appreciation for the law and decisions that enable these women to be free. The most blatant case of this is Asia Bibi, a woman on death row for drinking water from the wrong water bucket, who, having her conviction overturned, should in theory have been able to return to her life. As we all know, this was clearly impossible, and she had to leave the country. In her case, it was easy to demonstrate the level of risk to her life and that of her family, and even the Pakistani authorities were cognizant of this and kept her in protective custody until after she was free from prison. Despite her case being high profile, finding a new home abroad was not easy, and there were many involved in the process. The cases that are lower profile, not receiving the same level of attention, including the cases of disappearing minority religious women and girls, are even more challenging. Indeed, as Lord Alton mentioned, we're talking about approximately 1,000 religious minority women and girls each year, and we may only hear about a very few of these cases. Just a few weeks ago, I've been working on a case of a disappearing teenage girl from Pakistan. I wanted to mention two specific challenges that we encountered with the case, trying to find her a new safe haven outside of Pakistan. First, the issue of continuing risk to the life of that person seeking asylum. In the case of Asia, we all knew her life was at risk. We saw the 1,000-strong crowds walking through the streets in cities in Pakistan calling for her death. In other cases, it is much harder to demonstrate the continued risk to an individual's life, and as such, harder to provide sufficient evidence that they need to leave their country, and in turn, harder to find them a host nation. Secondly, the threat to the life of a person may also mean that other members of their family are at risk as well. We have seen this in many cases, that family members have been threatened and attacked. Sometimes the individual will be a child and will require an adult to travel and live with them in their new home country, or the individual may have dependents themselves. For one case, a significant number of people may need a new home. By way of example, the main asylum application of Asia Bibi to Canada was made up of 10 individuals. Interestingly, to touch on what Professor Tadros said, many of those 10 were also young women and young girls who had had to stop their education in Pakistan because of fear of leaving their house because of their connection to Asia. Furthermore, even when successful, a resettlement to a different country is not easy. Some victims have a greatly romanticized idea of life in the West, and the reality of it is often very hard for them to accept and hard for them to build a new life. Helping people to flee their home country must only be a last resort, with a priority to work to ensure individuals do not have to leave their home, or at least find safe zones within their own country. Understandably, finding a safer place within Pakistan for some cases may be very, very tricky, if not impossible. However, for those whom relocation is a necessity, it currently seems to be a matter of luck as to whether these cases get picked up or even noticed, following that they require significant political pressure and energy for governments to offer new homes to them. This is not a good system and will certainly fail altogether if the number of people needing to leave their country increases. In the meantime, a system to ensure that cases that are truly and most deserving are prioritized may be well worth an investment of time and energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anton, for sharing a little bit about your work assisting the disappearing women and girls from Pakistan or other persecuted religious minorities from Pakistan for other reasons. And of course, the picture presented today by our speakers shows that the situation of religious minority women and girls in Pakistan is dire. We don't know, very often we don't know enough about the situation in Pakistan. We hear only about a few cases, but of course the numbers are great. And they are so great that we should do our best to ensure that we provide some kind of assistance to them. And indeed, that is the first question with which I would like to open the question and answer section. And of course, we also have a similar question from Shiba Queen from Los Angeles. What can we do? And this question I would like to ask Ambreen and Maris. And just maybe identifying few action points for Lord Alton and other parliamentarians, whether in the UK or other countries. What should be the first asks? What should be the first action points for all of us in order to address the issue, the very neglected issue of the disappearing women and girls in Pakistan?
I think the first thing should be, for me, I think this the conversion has to stop. The conversion certificates issued by the madrasas is, if you see the case as a whole, where does the dynamics change in a case? That's when you'll see that is the conversion certificate. As soon as that is produced before the court, there you have no standing. Nobody has any standing, and that needs to be addressed. So I think the conversion certificate should be via courts only, and that is one of the most important things that needs to be done. And secondly, there should be other things like there should be a separate minorities helpline. There should be a separate minorities helpline initiated by the government. So these number of cases that are not being reported or are being underreported, because another thing that is every year they say 1,000, it never goes either up or down. So we need a proper mechanism to report these cases.
Thank you very much, Ambreen. And of course, you mentioned also other recommendations in your presentation, and we'll be very grateful for even for the list of all those recommendations to include them in the report that will be published by the APPG. And I would like to give the floor to Maris.
Thank you so much, Evelina. I think there are a number of recommendations, some to us, some to the Pakistani government. And obviously, what has already been said has been amazing. So I'm going to complement the excellent recommendations that have just been suggested by Ambreen. I think they're spot on. I think for us, I just want to use a comparator. 40, 50 years ago in the UK, to get people to recognize that when a woman is assaulted, the judge would say, did you say no? When he was about to rape you, did you say no? And with a bit of awareness, people understood that there's something called a lot of invisible power that comes into play. The question of did you say no or not becomes redundant. So I think the first thing is we need to raise awareness, change what we mean by consensus and intent. Because once people understand that the idea that did she show any signs of violent, I'm just talking about, for example, the case of Saniha. When she was being put in the car, did she scream very loudly? Did she try and stop them? Ambreen and I were saying, when you're in a situation when there is so much oppressive power around you, don't ask the wrong questions. Don't try and put the onus on the victim to show why she's a victim. So I think the first thing is we need to saturate the space. We need to break the silence about this and recognize it for what it is. It is forced marriage, it is sexual slavery, it's forced conversion. Let us not ask stupid questions. Sorry, I don't mean to, but they really are. We realized afterwards, 50 years on, that to ask a woman who's being raped, did you say no, was a stupid question. We need to come to a place where we're asking the right question, like the ones Ambreen is saying. That's the first thing, and that is the biggest challenge, the mindset. As long as we're in mindset where we're asking the wrong questions, people will continue to be under enormous oppression. That's the first thing. The second is for the Pakistani government. To complement what Ambreen was saying, we need to have an accountable police force. Just like we are now globally around the world holding the police force for any failings in accountability, we need to take this up. So we need to talk about, because this is the first instance. This is the instance where if the police doesn't take the report and if the police doesn't act, the likelihood that the young person can be retracted becomes very difficult. So we need to press the Pakistani government to hold the police accountable. We need to press the Pakistani government to send clear signals to its police force. If you don't accept a report, if you don't stand by any family that comes forward and wants you to act, you will be held accountable. And that the Pakistani government needs to do, because that is under its executive oversight. The third is we need to create this sense of people's solidarity, whether it's feminists, child rights activists, people who care about gender-based violence. We need, and of course, this needs to be done with great sensitivity, because sometimes certain forms of international solidarity can create a backlash. So we need to do this always in collaboration and in consultation with local actors on the ground, so that whatever we do, whatever our parliament does, is always at sync with what local communities want to happen. So I think these would be the three key strategic actions that I'm imploring the British government to take seriously and to take forward.
Thank you very much, Maris. And of course, those are also very important recommendations that we'll be including in the report of the APPG. And also maybe just from the political engagement perspective as well, I think something what we all tell activists here in the UK: write to your MP, or encourage supporters to write to your MP and raise this issue. I think this is very important for everyone on this webinar. We all can engage our representatives, whether here in the UK or other countries, shed light on the situation, show that we care about the situation of religious minority women and girls. Despite the fact that they are far away in Pakistan, we do care about what's happening to them, and we want a change. We can't accept this situation happening to them in the 21st century. So I think this is something that everyone on this call can do. Contact your representative, raise the issue, and trigger change from a bottom up. And also, I do have here a question from Julian there in relation to how can we engage the Human Rights Council on the topic. And of course, for example, Maris, she's doing incredible work with CREED and a number of partners who have the ECOSOC accreditation and can very easily engage the Human Rights Council. And they've been doing that over the years, and I'm sure that they will continue doing this important work. And one of the things that will need to happen is to ensure that all those recommendations that we are discussing here today as well, they go to those different international bodies, whether the Human Rights Council, whether the committee that works on the rights of women or on the rights of the child. So they all are aware of the situation, they all are aware of the possible solutions to the problem. So of course we need to make sure that this work doesn't stay in one place, but is distributed and reaches every level possible. And if I would like to give the floor maybe also to Lord Alton, just to briefly explain maybe the situation here in the UK. Of course, Lord Alton has been very active in engaging the government, engaging other parliamentarians, but ultimately the topic of the disappearing girls will disappear among so many other stories. Of course, right now, the situation of Uyghur Muslims, and including Uyghur women who are being forcibly sterilized, that is one of the main topics at the parliament. Then, of course, there is the situation of the Rohingya women and girls also being raped during the atrocities in Myanmar, and many other stories. But nonetheless, Lord Alton continues to raise the issue of the disappearing girls. But maybe if Lord Alton could share some of his experience on engaging on the topic with us.
Well, thank you, Evelina. You're right. Only yesterday in the House of Lords, I raised the issue of the situation in Xinjiang and the position of Uyghur Muslims there. And it's important to have this context. You think about what's happening in Xinjiang, or you think about what is happening, for instance, to Rohingya people, Muslim people. We must not look as though we're only looking for human rights for one selected group of people. And that is why I loved what Ambreen said at the beginning of her remarks about placing this in the context of international jurisprudence, in the context of Pakistan's own laws, and also in the context of the religious debate and engaging Islamic scholars to say what is permitted and what isn't, and things that are done in the name of religion, such as female genital mutilation, which religious leaders have condemned and come out against, and that has brought about change. So I think that we have to move on a number of fronts at the same time. I'm full of admiration for Muhammad Ali Jinnah, whom Ambreen referred to, who was the founder of Pakistan, not least because of the things he said himself about Pakistan being an inclusive, plural, diverse society and every citizen being given the same rights. But of course, he was also, Pakistan was a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which in Article 18 says you should be free to hold the religious views of your choice. You're to have no views if you're a humanist or an atheist, and to be also free to change those views, but all based on the principle of personal choice and freedom, not on imposition or coercion. So we must keep on adumbrating the importance of things like the Universal Declaration as something that is for all men and women and not just a selected few. I think that some of the points Ambreen was making about the Malaysian example, for instance, about conversion certificates currently issued by madrasas, this is a really important question that we should be able to, for instance, place in correspondence with our own government ministers, but perhaps even more importantly, with Mr. Imran Khan and with the government of Pakistan. And I try to engage in a constructive way, positive way with Pakistan. I've regularly been to see the High Commissioner in London. So this isn't something that we want to be shouting about in a sort of sterile, confrontational way. We have to engage. And I think this point about conversion certificates would make a big difference. I also think that what Ambreen said to us about FIR submissions by minorities in the courts on using existing laws to protect minorities, things like the seduction of minors, for instance. I think that was a really telling point that was made, but also her reference to the 2016 Child Marriage Act and the need to delete references to non-Muslim women from that. These are really good points that we need to carefully catalogue and press for. But there was a practical point she made as well about the need for a minorities helpline, and she talked about a minorities rights emergency, and Mary's also touched on these sorts of things as well. There's no reason at all why we shouldn't be saying to what is now the FCDO, because it's now got development as well as foreign policy under the same title, why shouldn't we be saying to Dominic Raab, use some of the £340,000, I repeat, £340,000 that is given in aid every single day to Pakistan, British taxpayers' money. Why isn't some of that being used to set up a minorities helpline, to get the government of Pakistan to initiate that? And why shouldn't we help to fund it and make it work? It's a very practical and really good point that was made. And Ambreen said something had to be done about the socio-economic conditions of Hindu and Christian families. During my last visit to Pakistan, I went to some of the so-called colonies around Lahore and saw for myself there and in Islamabad the conditions which people are in that no running water, no electricity, dirt floors, no educational opportunities. I mean, the conditions were absolutely diabolical. And that does make people particularly prone, as Ambreen said, to exploitation of various kinds. And she rightly contrasted the position with, for instance, Parsis. You can't do these things to people if they have resources. You can't do these things to people if they're educated. So you have to have the opportunities to do that. And I mean, the last point I would make as well, a very practical thing, was about intimidation. What Ambreen said to us about, or Maris, I think it was as well, about large numbers of people being able to come and speak in the courts and to shout against the petitioner, to intimidate the families of someone whose loved one has been abducted. That is intolerable and would not be acceptable in courts of law around the world, and shouldn't be acceptable in Pakistan either. So I think that is something practical which we should be taking back to the Chief Justice in Pakistan and engaging with them in a constructive way to try and eliminate those practices, and collecting data as well. I mean, it's a given. What is this 1,000 every year? What is that based on? And why does the number never change, either up or down, and is always static? Empirical evidence is crucial when you're trying to advance an argument in Parliament or to government. So I think the collecting of more data, the giving of more faces to the invisible people, as Evelina described them, and also Anton's point about how we actually assist people if they've had to flee from Pakistan. I visited the detention centres in Southeast Asia, where escaping Pakistanis, including Ahmadis and Christians, were literally caged like wild animals. It is intolerable that the United Nations High Commission on Refugees is so indifferent to the plight of people in that situation. They're between a rock and a hard place. They've left their country and there's nowhere willing to provide anywhere else for them. We cannot go on leaving people like that. They are part of this massive migration crisis engulfing the world at this time. But we, put a face to the individuals, and let's do something about that.
Thank you very much, Lord Alton, for the great summary as well of everything what needs to be done and how we could engage. And we still have few more minutes, and I just wanted to give the floor to Maris to explain a little bit about some of the challenges in conducting empirical studies in Pakistan. That relates back to what Lord Alton mentioned, that of course we want to have the data, we want to have clear data that will then help to further some of the arguments at the Parliament. But so what are the challenges in obtaining such information in Pakistan?
So, of course, we are very mindful that the first and foremost is the not putting individuals or communities at risk. This is very crucial, because even with the best of intent, we can do more harm than good if people suffer consequences as a consequence of associating or engaging with us. So we are, when we undertake this research, we ensure that we are doing it through local development practitioners, not external researchers, not external human rights activists. This is not in any way being disrespectful to human rights activists who are committed to the cause, but it is be mindful of the fact that being seen to speak to a foreigner about such sensitive issues in Pakistan can be very serious. And so we choose people from within the communities, and that is very important. The second is we build the capacity of people in the communities to do this research, because unless it's robust and it's rigorous, it's not going to be taken seriously internationally. And so this involves a great deal of capacity building on how they can collect this data empirically in a way that is coherent, consistent, fact-checked, corroborated, and so forth. The third is legitimacy. I think people who are very poor, and this program, as mentioned, is focused on the intersection of poverty and religious marginality. People who are very poor are very scared to speak. These are not those that are sitting in offices where they are well-known figures, so if anything happens to them, it'll be in the Pakistani media. These are very, very poor people whose livelihoods is at risk and who are in very compromising situations. So we always ensure that the questions are put within frames that are not intimidating, and those who undertake the research are members of the same community. And trust and legitimacy are so important. Where we don't have access to a community, we will not do this research. And I think that the last thing is that we respect it when people want to be anonymized, We respect it when they don't want their pictures to be shared, when they don't want their details to be shared. And that is very important for us because it's about trust. And lastly, I think because we are doing this within the framework of sustainable development, we frame it in terms of people's well-being, people's being able to live every aspect of their life fully, so that the wording isn't wording that would put them or our local partners at risk.
Thank you very much, Maris, for this explanation, and thank you very much for reminding us about the need to adopt a victim-oriented approach in any kind of work that we do when we deal with religious minority women and girls abducted, forcibly converted, forcibly married, and abused, who are very vulnerable as well in such situations. And of course, we would not want to exacerbate the pain and suffering that they've been through. And thank you very much for that reminder. And I think we can conclude this session at this stage. I think we've heard a lot from Maris, Ambreen, Anton, and Lord Alton. There is a lot to unpack over the next weeks and months. There is a lot of action points to follow up, and also responding to one of the questions in relation to the report. So of course, the report that Lord Alton mentioned, that it still requires a lot of work, and there will be definitely a lot of information that will need to go into it, lots of recommendations even from today that we'll need to look into and explore, elaborate upon. And of course, there's a big message to everyone on this call that if there is any information that you believe is important, you can always get in touch, and most of you will have my email address because I sent you the Zoom link. So please stay in touch. Please let me know if there is anything else that you believe it's important for us to know for the report, but also for any kind of political engagement here in the UK or abroad. So please stay in touch and make sure that we continue to talk about the disappearing women and girls, and we shed light on this situation and trigger action, because that's urgently needed. Thank you very much.